So I have a new goal in life. Pretty excited about this. I'm getting back into Legos again, and I intend to build a full-size minivan with Legos. I've got a lot of time on my hand. I've just got to be here a couple hours a week, and so I started on it. You know, it takes a lot of pieces and a lot of time, and it's confusing to know which pieces go where. So I started doing some shortcuts because it's boring. I didn't know where all the pieces went. So I think this is almost as impressive. I ended up with this. It's not as good, isn't it? It's like an eco-van, you know? It's got a tree growing out of it, and not quite as impressive. I think we do this with our lives. God's designed us and formed us in His image, and we settle for so much less. Rather than taking all the pieces from our lives, all the pieces of who God has designed us to be, we're satisfied with less. It's easy to be too satisfied with less than who you are called to be. We're going to think about this more by looking at the Apostle James. And first we'll go through a few fascinating facts about James. So first is that he's a big brother. He's a big brother to the Apostle John. James and John. Now how about the top picture? What's that remind us? Something that we know about James? He's a fisherman. And now the bottom picture on the right, this is a probability. But what is that? Adam's family. Who's sitting in the chair? Cousin. Most likely, the Apostle James is a cousin to Jesus. Most likely, James' mother Salome and Jesus' mother Mary were sisters. All right? So that picture will help you remember that. Now, there's an interesting thing. When you get to start knowing someone, you start getting things mixed up. When my brother and I were growing up, oh, you can't get it in its fullness. We didn't look that much alike. I had cool hair, and he had cool pants. But people would mix us up all the time. It shouldn't have been that confusing, but they would get us mixed up. And we mix up the Apostle James with other people. For one thing, it's a little confusing because there's two James in the 12 disciples. There's James, son of Zebedee, that we're talking about, and James, son of Alphaeus. There's the first name. Other mix-ups. One is, this James the Apostle, is not Jesus' little brother. Jesus had a brother named James, different James. Another thing is there's a James in Acts chapter 15 who oversees the Jerusalem Council. Huge deal. Different James. There's a James who wrote the book of James in the Bible. Different James. All right? So that's who James is not. We've got the fun stuff done. Now we're going to take a little bit more of what we know about this Apostle James. James is most likely from a family with connections. Remember when Jesus called the disciples, the first ones, to follow him? They were fishing. James and John were told that there were servants working alongside them. Gives you an idea of a family of stature, that they had something going on. They're hiring people to work for them. Another thing, at the end of the Gospel of John, in which Jesus is on trial, and John, James' brother, is able to get into the high priest area because his family was known by the high priest. Sounds like connections. So the family maybe has more connections than we think about sometimes. Another thing that's interesting about this James is that he's one of the inner three with Jesus. So when Jesus does some really tremendous things, he chooses three guys to go along with him. And James is one of them. Peter, John, James. They saw Jairus' daughter healed dramatically. They went to the Transfiguration. Huge thing, just the three of them. praying in the garden just before Jesus is arrested. James is part of the inner three. James, pretty significant guy. But, remember how I talked about at the beginning with the Legos that we can settle for so much less? We get the picture of James settling for so much less at different times. Here's what James settled for. Does anyone remember the nickname that Jesus gave James and John? Sons of Thunder. Yeah, isn't that cool? It sounds like like a wrestling team or something. Sons of Thunder. So, and this is what he said. He appointed the 12, Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, the brother of James, to whom he gave the name Boanerges, that is, sons of thunder. This isn't just a fun nickname. In how it's crafted in the Greek, there's a genitive here, so it's clear that this is a characteristic. You know, it's not because these guys ate a lot of beans or something. It's not along those lines. This is something like character. And so when you think Sons of Thunder, there's some stories that bring out their personality. One is where James and John call down fire from heaven to destroy a town. It didn't happen, but they're like, should we do it? So let's think about it. This is Sons of Thunder stuff, right? I mean, this gives you a glimpse of the personality. Luke chapter 9. When the days drew near for him, that's Jesus, to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. And he sent messengers ahead of him who went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him. But the people did not receive him because his face was set toward Jerusalem. And when the disciples, James and John, saw it, they said, Lord, do you want us to tell fire to come down from heaven and consume them? But he turned and rebuked them, and they went on to another village. Sons of thunder. First of all, they're going to Samaritans, who Jews and Samaritans don't like each other. There's friction. But Jesus had gone to the Samaritans before. He'd done nice things for them. And now they tell Jesus, nah, we're not going to put you up. Too bad for you. You're going on to Jerusalem. We don't want any part of Jerusalem. You're doing something we don't want to be a part of. So, no. Too bad. It doesn't seem like that huge a deal. And James and John say, do you want us to tell fire to come down? We'll burn them up. And when I read that, I'm like, fascinating. And seriously, I mean, you think about it. I mean, really? Have you ever hanging out with people? And they're like, hey, I couldn't get a motel room. I'm going to call out fire from heaven. You know, that's random. You have anger issues. Seriously. And so, this was my reaction when I read it this week, preparing. I'm like, that's how I prepare sermons. I like wave bubble wands around. I'm like, ooh, fascinating. So, it seems random, but there's something behind it. James and John knew their scriptures. Elijah was in a similar area, and he called down fire from heaven, and it happened. Here's the story. This is years and years prior to James and John. Then the king sent to him a captain of 50 men with his 50. He went up to Elijah, who was sitting on the top of the hill, and said to him, O man of God, the king says, come down. But Elijah answered the captain of 50, if I'm a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50. Then fire came down from heaven and consumed him and his 50. So James and John are looking back and they're like, oh, call down fire. This is the right sort of thing to do. And they missed something critical. Sensitivity before fire. They had a desire to honor Christ. They didn't want anybody looking down on Christ, not doing what they should do. That was right. But their situation is different than Elijah's. God had already judged the evil empire that was trying to do Elijah in. That judgment had taken place by God, not by Elijah. Elijah was looking for God to bring about judgment, and James and John are like, how about we take care of this ourselves? We'll just take care of it. Very different situation. what it points out is we need to love people more than we love being right. It's so easy to fall into the trap of loving being right. James and John were right, but they lost the love of people. And I think I can say this because I'm old enough, but it's easy to fall into that trap with social media stuff, in which we drop a bomb on there, in which maybe we're right, maybe we're supporting a moral thing that is so right, but we do it in a hateful, spiteful way that is far from loving people. Not that we give up what is right, there's black and white, there's right and wrong, but can we do it in a way that is loving? Sensitivity before fire. After this event, a little while later, after Christ has died and risen again, Philip went down to the city and proclaimed to them the Christ. And the crowd with one accord paid attention to what was being said by Philip when they heard him and saw the signs that he did. For unclean spirits, crying out with a loud voice, came out of many who had them, and many who were paralyzed or lame were healed. So there was much joy in that city. If James and John had called down fire to burn up this village, would people come to know Christ later? No. I think James had the opportunity to learn something. One is, you can't use that short fuse excuse. I'd love to run around with a sticker on me that says, I have a short fuse. Put up with me because I just have a short fuse. Deal with me. I don't think Jesus was giving him a license to do that. He wasn't going to get a sticker to do whatever he wanted to. He said, deal with your short fuse. And the other thing is patience of waiting. Love people more than you love being right. All right, Sons of Thunder. I think I'm going to get my own t-shirt made of this. Sons of Thunder. I looked up, if you do an image search of Sons of Thunder, it's great. You get all sorts of great stuff. So another thing, James does this Son of Thunder thing along with his brother again, in which they want to be close to the throne. And we read this story a little while ago. Remember, they put their mom up to going to Jesus and saying, get us good seats in the kingdom. Get us on the left and the right of the throne. We want a reward for all of these things that we're doing. And ask before any of the other disciples do. They are so focused on reward. And Jesus' answer is fascinating. He says, you're going on the wrong track. Go back. You've got the wrong goal in mind. Jesus starts talking about, are you ready to drink my cup of suffering? They're looking for rewards. And Jesus says, how will you drink from my cup of suffering? Fair trade? Their goal is all wrong. And I wonder, how often in life do I get hooked on the wrong goal in life? Maybe it's good things, but it's not what God intends for me. So with the cup of suffering, Jesus says, are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink? And they said to him, we are able. I think Jesus is pointing out to them, following is not all about rewards. You're not following me just so you can end up in some place other than hell. You're not following me just because you want to get good things in life. I hope you're following me because you love me. I hope you're following me because you want to honor God. It begs the question for myself, why do I follow God? Am I out for some sort of reward, short term? More than knowing God himself. The last that we hear of the Apostle James is that he followed well. Acts chapter 12. About that time, Herod the king laid violent hands on some who belonged to the church. He killed James, the brother of John, with a sword. And when he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. This was during the days of unleavened bread. James is the first of the 12 apostles to be martyred. This is a nice way of saying that he was beheaded. violent death. Interesting that James is the first one chosen. You get the impression that this guy who was so zealous, so almost out of control with the Sons of Thunder thing, that his passion was harnessed by God, and his gifts were harnessed by God in a way that made him a tremendous threat as he was leading the church forward. And the first guy to get picked off is James, because he's put himself in a place that God would use all of his gifts and talents. And when I think about James, I think about harness. I don't know much about horses, so I just get this picture of like this muscular horse that can run like crazy. But if it doesn't go in a harness, you can't harness it. You can't get the usefulness out of it. It just runs wild. And this is the picture of the Son of Thunder. He can run all over the place. He can do all sorts of things. He's full of zealousness. But he's out of control. But once he submits to God, once he is harnessed by God, he's doing these tremendous things in which Herod wants him out of the way first, because he's a threat. James goes from simply being zealous to undoubtedly having sensitivity before fire, in which he would love people more than just loving being right. Undoubtedly, his zealousness would move more towards following for God's glory and not his own rewards. And when I think about James, think about the blind spots he had, and I think about for ourselves. In a lot of areas of the country, there's multi-lane highways. I don't know, have you ever seen one? There's not any in Potter County, but there's places in which there's roads that have multiple lanes, and you have to look to make sure there's nobody there before you move over. Blind spots. We need to check our blind spots. And probably most of us have gone through a SWOT analysis where you look at strengths, you look at weaknesses, you look at threats and opportunities. You gotta figure out, what am I good at? What am I bad at? What do I need to work on? Something that James needed to work on was an overstrength. We don't think about overstrengths very often. James was so good at zealousness. James was so good at being fired up. It just came to me. All right. It was a good one if you missed it. He was but it was an overstrength. It wasn't checked. I think about, what about for ourselves? Each one of us has strengths. Are there times in which we run too far with those strengths? Maybe you have a strength of leadership in which, people kind of gravitate and kind of look to you for direction and decision making. And can we take that gift so far as to insensitivity, in which we lose sight of other people's feelings? Maybe we have the gift of help, of coming alongside people, of being very giving and encouraging. But if we go too far, that we can be enabling to sin patterns. Maybe we have the gift of being an achiever, of we can get things done. But we struggle with discontentment because we can never achieve enough. Maybe we have the gift of focus. We can get things all together and get people unified into one direction. But man, we're impatient when people don't see the light. Or maybe it's learning. We love to read. We love to take in information. But applying it is so hard. Or maybe we're gifted at being relational, in which we can get really close to people. We can help people through all sorts of things. But it makes us vulnerable to woundedness. Which when people turn their backs on us, we are extra wounded. Or maybe we carry other people's burdens and it ends up wounding us as well. We need to be careful of our overstrengths. I thought somebody stole my car. In the other pew. Don't settle for this. It is so easy to settle for this because it's quick, it's easy, and it uses some good pieces. God has designed us for so much more. Take all the pieces that God is giving us. Let's not get discouraged, and to keep moving forward and finding out what God has called us to. God has created each one of us for tremendous purposes. God has created us very uniquely. And it's not this. I hope this week that we continue to think through the strengths and abilities that God has gifted us with and to use them for His glory.